It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when my parents showed up unannounced. I wasn't expecting visitors, so I figured they were just stopping by to see Emily and Jackson, who were playing in the living room. But as soon as I opened the door, I knew something was wrong. My mom clutched a thick folder to her chest, her expression a mix of concern and guilt. My dad stood behind her, silent but visibly uneasy. "Can we talk?" my mom asked. "Sure," I said, confused but trying not to jump to conclusions. I led them to the kitchen, glancing over my shoulder as Emily giggled at one of Jackson's goofy faces. Whatever this was, I didn't want it to interrupt the kids' happiness. As soon as we sat down, my mom placed the folder on the table. "Angela, she's worried about the kids," she began hesitantly. I frowned, not understanding. "Worried? What do you mean?" My dad cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. She thinks the kids aren't safe with you." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. "What?" I finally managed to say. "What are you talking about? Emily and Jackson are perfectly safe. I would never." "She's been collecting things," my mom interrupted, gesturing to the folder. "Photos, notes, messages. She thinks you're overwhelmed, and she's worried about their well-being." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My kids, my sweet, happy, healthy kids, are my whole world. Every decision I make revolves around them. I've spent countless sleepless nights making sure they have everything they need. And now, my own sister was accusing me of being a danger to them? "Let me see that," I said, my voice shaking as I reached for the folder. Inside, I found a collection of carefully curated evidence. There were screenshots of my social media posts, pictures of messy playdates, captions about feeling exhausted, even a video I'd shared of Emily having a tantrum. To me, these were just snippets of normal parenting life. But Angela had twisted them into something dark. She'd added notes in the margins, painting a picture of neglect and instability. "She's been doing this for months?" I asked, my voice rising as I flipped through the pages. Why wouldn't she just talk to me if she was concerned? Why go behind my back like this? My mom reached out to touch my hand, but I pulled away. "She says she didn't want to upset you," she said softly. "She thought this was the best way to handle it." "The best way?" I said, my voice shaking with anger. "To accuse me of being a bad mother? To make it look like I can't take care of my own kids?" And then my dad dropped the real bombshell. "She doesn't just think you need help," he said, his voice heavy. "She wants to adopt them herself." It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "She was," I whispered. "She filed paperwork," my mom admitted. "She thinks it would be better if they lived with her." My mind reeled. Angela didn't have kids of her own, and she'd always been a bit controlling, but this was beyond anything I could have imagined. She wasn't just worried about Emily and Jackson, she was actively trying to take them from me. "She's gone too far," I said, slamming the folder shut. "I don't care what she's worried about. My kids are mine, and there is no way I'm letting her do this." But even as I said the words, a cold knot of fear settled in my chest. Angela wasn't just making empty accusations. She was building a case, and she was serious. This wasn't going to be a simple misunderstanding. This was a battle, and it was only just beginning. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. Angela had always been the type to thrive on competition. Growing up, she turned everything into a contest: who got better grades, who had more friends, who landed the better job. It was exhausting, but I chalked it up to sibling rivalry. When I became a mother, I thought the competitiveness might finally fade. Instead, it turned into something darker. It started small. Angela would make casual comments about my parenting choices, questioning things in a way that felt more intrusive than helpful. "Are you sure those snacks are healthy enough?" she'd ask as Emily munched on a granola bar. Or, "Shouldn't Jackson be in bed earlier than this if she saw him still awake during a family dinner?" I brushed it off, telling myself she was just being overbearing, as usual. But now, in hindsight, I realized those comments weren't harmless. They were calculated. Angela wasn't just offering unsolicited advice, she was laying the groundwork for what was to come. She'd make those remarks in front of our parents, planting seeds of doubt about my abilities as a mother. At the time, I dismissed it as her usual meddling. I didn't realize she was spinning a web, one strand at a time, with me as the target. As I pieced it all together, the memories came flooding back. There was the time Emily had a meltdown during a family barbecue, and Angela made a point of loudly saying, "Wow, she really seems out of control lately. Are you sure everything's okay at home?" Or the time Jackson tripped over his own feet while playing in the backyard, and Angela ran to him, theatrically asking if he was always this clumsy. I vented to her once about how hard it was to juggle work and parenting as a single mom, hoping for some sisterly support. Instead, she responded with a concerned tilt of her head and a pointed question. Do you think maybe the kids would be better off with a more stable routine? At the time, I rolled my eyes and changed the subject. I didn't want to get into an argument, especially not with someone who'd never had kids of her own. But now, I saw it for what it was, a calculated attempt to paint me as overwhelmed and incapable. What I didn't know then was that Angela had been collecting evidence for months. Every tantrum, every messy playdate, every offhand comment I made about being tired or stressed, it all became part of her narrative. She'd even weaponized my social media. I loved sharing little glimpses of our life online. Pictures of Emily with finger paint all over her hands, videos of Jackson giggling in a pile of toys, captions about the chaos and joy of motherhood. To me, it was normal. But to Angela, it was ammunition. She's always posting about how hard things are, Angela told her parents, showing them screenshots of my posts. I just don't know if she can handle this on her own. At the time, I had no idea what she was up to. I thought she was being nosy and judgmental, as usual. It wasn't until the folder appeared on my kitchen table, filled with those very screenshots and twisted interpretations, that I realized how far she was willing to go. The real kicker came when I remembered a conversation she'd had with my mom a few weeks before everything exploded. Angela had been unusually quiet at first, watching Emily and Jackson play while we all sat in the living room. Then, she leaned over to my mom and said, just loud enough for me to hear, I just don't know how she manages all this on her own. It must be so overwhelming. My mom had brushed it off at the time, replying, oh, she's doing just fine. The kids are happy, and that's what matters. But Angela had pressed on. Still, don't you think they'd benefit from a little more stability? A bigger support system? I didn't engage, thinking it was just another one of her digs. But now I saw it for what it really was. Angela was sowing doubt, planting the idea that my kids might be better off with someone else, someone like her. She wasn't just criticizing my parenting. She was setting the stage for a full-blown attack. And I had walked right into her trap, without even realizing it. It was a typical Thursday afternoon when the knock came at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I assumed it was a delivery or one of the neighborhood kids selling cookies. Instead, I opened the door to find a woman with a clipboard and a serious expression. She introduced herself as a social worker from Child Protective Services. Is this a bad time? She asked, her tone calm but authoritative. My stomach dropped. No, I stammered. What's going on? We've received an anonymous report expressing concern about the safety of your children, she said. Her words were professional, but her presence alone felt like a judgment. I'd like to talk with you and take a look around the house, if that's okay. My hands shook as I let her in, trying to process what was happening. Of course, I said, forcing a polite smile. My mind was racing. Who would report me to CPS? What could they possibly have said? She started with a few questions, asking about Emily and Jackson's routines, their school schedules, and their medical care. Then she asked to see the house. I led her through each room, pointing out the kids' bedrooms, their toy corner in the living room, and the kitchen where their artwork covered the fridge. I could feel my heart pounding the entire time. The house wasn't spotless. There were toys scattered across the floor, a sink with a few dishes in it, but it was full of love. Their beds were neatly made, their favorite books stacked by their nightstands, and the smell of cookies we'd baked the night before lingered in the air. The social worker nodded as she took notes. Everything seems fine so far, she said, her tone neutral. She then asked to speak with Emily and Jackson. My heart clenched, but I agreed. Emily, my little chatterbox, immediately told her about the cookies we'd made and how her brother had spilled the sprinkles everywhere. Jackson, who was shyer, clung to my leg but eventually showed her his favorite stuffed dinosaur. The social worker smiled, thanked them, and wrapped up her visit. We'll review the report and follow up if necessary, she said as she left. As soon as the door closed, I sank onto the couch, my hands shaking. Emily climbed into my lap, sensing something was wrong. Mommy, who is that lady? She asked. Just someone checking to make sure everything's okay, I said, hugging her tightly. You and Jackson are my everything. Don't you ever forget that. That night, after putting the kids to bed, I couldn't shake the anxiety. Who would do this? My mind kept circling back to Angela, but I didn't want to believe it. Still, I needed answers. I picked up my phone and called her. Angela, you won't believe what happened today. I began, trying to keep my voice steady. What's wrong? She asked, her concern immediate and, at first, convincing. CPS showed up at my door, I said. Someone filed a report saying the house isn't safe for the kids. There was a pause, just long enough to make me uneasy. Oh my God, she said finally, her voice dripping with sympathy. Who would accuse you of something like that? That's what I'm trying to figure out, I said. They didn't say who filed the report. I don't know why anyone would think the kids are unsafe here. Angela launched into a tirade about how ridiculous the situation was, how CPS should be investigating actual bad parents instead of someone like me. It's probably just some nosy neighbor or a misunderstanding, she said. You're a great mom, and anyone who knows you can see that. Her words should have reassured me, but something in her tone felt off. There was a hint of performance, a little too much outrage, like she was trying to convince me and herself that she had nothing to do with it. For the first time, I started to suspect Angela wasn't as innocent as she seemed. The timing was too convenient, the accusations too similar to the concerns she'd been voicing to our parents for months. And the way she reacted, like she knew exactly what to say to deflect suspicion, only made me more uneasy. After I hung up, I sat in the silence of my living room, replaying the conversation in my head. Could my own sister really have done this? Could she have filed a report, knowing the stress and fear it would cause, just to further her case against me? I didn't want to believe it. But as I thought about the folder of evidence my parents had shown me, the comments Angela had made over the years, and the way she'd always tried to position herself as the better sister, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a calculated move. And Angela wasn't done yet. The days following the CPS visit were a blur of anxiety and frustration. My mind kept circling back to Angela, but I needed proof before confronting her. Instead, I decided to talk to my parents. If Angela had been feeding them doubts about my parenting, surely they'd have some answers. I called and asked if I could come over. My mom sounded hesitant but agreed. When I arrived, both she and my dad were sitting in the living room, their expressions unreadable. I didn't waste any time. We need to talk about Angela, I said, standing with my arms crossed. What about her? My mom asked, her tone cautious. She's been telling you I can't handle my kids, hasn't she? I said. She's been planting these ideas in your heads, and now CPS is involved. I need to know exactly what she's been saying. My mom exchanged a nervous glance with my dad. She's just worried about the kids, she said finally. She thinks you've been struggling lately, and she's trying to help. Helps? I snapped, my voice rising. By calling CPS on me? By making me look like an unfit mother? Calm down, my dad said, holding up his hands. Angela didn't say anything about CPS. She just mentioned some concerns. She thought it would be better to share them with us instead of confronting you directly. And you believed her? I asked, my frustration boiling over. My mom hesitated, then stood and walked to the kitchen counter. She returned with a thick folder, the same one they'd brought to my house before. Look, she gave us this, she said, placing it on the coffee table. She said it was just in case we ever needed to intervene. I stared at the folder, anger bubbling in my chest. Intervene? I repeated. Just open it, my mom said quietly. I flipped the folder open, and my heart sank. Inside were printed screenshots of my social media posts, painstakingly curated and annotated. There were photos of Emily and Jackson covered in paint during a particularly messy playdate, with a note scribbled in the margin. Is this really safe? Another page showed a post where I'd written about being exhausted after a long week, captioned, "Single mom life is no joke, but I wouldn't trade it for anything." Angela had underlined the words exhausted and single mom, adding a comment. She sounds overwhelmed. Can she really handle this alone? The worst was a video I'd shared of Emily throwing a tantrum in the middle of the grocery store. It was a moment of real-life parenting that I'd shared with a caption about surviving toddlerhood. Angela had written beneath it, evidence of emotional instability. This can't be good for the kids. Every single piece of my life that I'd shared with friends and family, every moment of honesty and vulnerability, had been twisted into something ugly. I closed the folder and looked up at my parents, my hands shaking. You can't seriously think this means I'm a bad mom, I said, my voice cracking. We don't, my dad said firmly. But Angela, she's convinced herself you need help. She said she's just trying to do what's best for the kids. By trying to take them away from me? I said, my voice rising again. This isn't concern, this is sabotage. She's twisting everything I do into something it's not. And you're letting her. Don't yell, my mom said, her tone defensive. We didn't say we agree with her. We just wanted to understand where she was coming from. She's coming from a place of jealousy and control, I said, standing. She doesn't care about Emily and Jackson. She just wants to prove she's better than me. My dad frowned, but didn't argue. My mom, however, looked like she was about to cry. We're just trying to do what's best for the kids, she said softly. And what about what's best for me? I asked. I'm their mother. I love them. I've never done anything to hurt them, and you know that. So, why are you letting her poison your opinion of me? Neither of them had an answer, and I left feeling angrier than ever. I drove home. Replaying the conversation in my head, the folder still burned into my memory. It was clear now that Angela wasn't just meddling, she was building a case against me. The question was, what was I going to do about it? That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling as the kids slept soundly in their rooms. I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let Angela win. I didn't know how far she was willing to go, but I was ready to fight. My kids deserved better than this. And so did I. Things escalated faster than I could have imagined. Less than a week after confronting my parents, I received a notice in the mail. Angela had filed a petition for temporary custody of Emily and Jackson. The words on the page blurred as my hands trembled. Temporary custody. My own sister was trying to take my kids away from me. The notice included a list of accusations, each one more ridiculous than the last. Angela claimed I was emotionally unstable, that I lacked the financial resources to provide for the kids, and that I created an unsafe environment due to my overwhelmed and erratic behavior. She even cited the CPS visit as evidence, conveniently omitting the fact that the case had gone nowhere because there was no actual issue. I was blindsided. Angela's attack was calculated and ruthless, and it left me scrambling to defend myself. I hired a lawyer immediately, but the court date came too soon for me to feel fully prepared. Before I knew it, I was sitting in a courtroom, staring at my sister across the aisle as she tried to take my children away from me. Angela played her role perfectly. Dressed in a conservative blazer and minimal makeup, she projected the image of a concerned aunt who was simply trying to do the right thing. Her lawyer started by presenting the evidence from the folder, the same twisted narrative of social media posts, photos, and videos that Angela had shown my parents. Angela took the stand, her voice trembling with fake emotion. I love my sister, she began, glancing at me as if to underscore her point. But I've been watching her struggle for a long time. She's a single mother, and it's clear to me that she's overwhelmed. She went on to describe moments she'd witnessed. Emily's tantrum at the barbecue, Jackson's scraped knee from playing in the backyard, as though they were signs of neglect rather than the normal chaos of raising young children. They need stability, she said, clutching her hands together like she was praying. And I'm just not sure they're getting that right now. Her lawyer nodded sympathetically, as if every word Angela said was gospel truth. Your Honor, this isn't about taking the kids away from their mother permanently, he said smoothly. It's about ensuring their immediate safety and well-being while we address the concerns we've outlined. I felt sick as I listened. Angela was painting me as overwhelmed, careless, and incapable, all while wearing the mask of a loving sister who only wanted to help. Her words twisted every normal parenting challenge into a crisis, every moment of honesty into proof of inadequacy. When it was my turn to speak, my lawyer guided me through my testimony. I explained the reality behind the accusations. The tantrum Angela mentioned was an isolated incident, not a pattern of instability. The messy playdates and spilled snacks weren't signs of neglect. They were the hallmarks of a happy, active childhood. I've always done everything I can to provide for Emily and Jackson, I said, my voice shaking but firm. They are my world. The idea that I would ever endanger them is not just hurtful, it's absurd. I also pointed out Angela's lack of first-hand knowledge. She doesn't live with me. She doesn't see our daily routines or how much love and care I pour into my kids' lives. She's basing her accusations on cherry-picked moments and twisting them to suit her narrative. My lawyer followed up by presenting letters from friends, teachers, and neighbors who knew me and my children well. Each letter painted a picture of a devoted mother doing her best for her kids, a stark contrast to Angela's claims. The judge listened carefully to both sides, his expression unreadable. When the arguments concluded, he announced that he would need more time to review the evidence before making a decision. My heart sank. I had hoped for an immediate dismissal of Angela's petition, but it seemed this fight was far from over. As I left the courtroom, Angela approached me, her face a mask of false concern. I just want what's best for the kids, she said softly, as though we hadn't just spent hours tearing each other apart in front of a judge. I stared at her, my anger barely contained. What's best for the kids is staying with their mother, I said through gritted teeth. Not being used as pawns in whatever game you're playing. Her smile faltered, but she didn't respond. Instead, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the hallway, seething with frustration and fear. This wasn't just a legal battle, it was a betrayal of the deepest kind. My sister had crossed a line, and I knew I couldn't rely on family ties or emotional appeals to stop her. If I wanted to keep my children, I would have to fight like I never had before. After the custody hearing, I left the courtroom feeling battered, but determined. Angela had made it clear she wasn't going to back down, and if I wanted to keep my kids, I couldn't afford to stay quiet anymore. It was time to fight back. The first step was hiring a lawyer who specialized in family law. I explained everything: Angela's accusations, the CPS visit, the twisted evidence she'd presented. My lawyer listened carefully, taking notes before leaning forward with a determined look. "We're going to build your case from the ground up," she said. "You're their mother, and unless Angela can prove they're in immediate danger, the law is on your side." That reassurance gave me the strength to push forward. I began reaching out to everyone who knew me and my kids. Friends, neighbors, Emily's preschool teacher, Jackson's daycare provider. I asked each of them to write letters describing the environment in my home and my dedication as a mother. The responses were overwhelming. Mrs. Nguyen, Emily's teacher, wrote about how Emily always came to school with a packed lunch, clean clothes, and stories about the fun things we did together. My next-door neighbor, who often watched Jackson for me in emergencies, described how happy and well cared for the kids were every time they were at her house. Even the parents of Emily's friends pitched in, describing how much I cared for their kids during playdates. My lawyer compiled everything into a dossier, pairing it with photos of our family moments, ones Angela hadn't cherry-picked to distort. There were pictures of Emily's last birthday party, Jackson proudly holding up a finger painting, and the three of us snuggled on the couch during a movie night. "This paints a very different picture than what Angela is trying to present," my lawyer said as we reviewed the evidence. "The court needs to see this." But while building my case was critical, I also knew I had to dig into Angela's motives. Her sudden interest in my kids was baffling. She'd never expressed a strong desire to be a parent before. Why now? What did she stand to gain? The more I looked into it, the more the pieces started to fall into place. Angela had been struggling financially for years. She'd lost her job during the pandemic and was living off sporadic freelance gigs and whatever help she could get from our parents. I hadn't realized how bad things were until I found a public record of her falling behind on her mortgage payments. Then, I learned something that made everything click. Adopting Emily and Jackson would come with significant government benefits. Financial assistance, tax breaks, even housing support. Angela stood to gain a lot if she became their legal guardian. My stomach turned as I pieced it together. This wasn't just about jealousy or control, it was greed. Angela didn't want my kids because she thought she could provide a better life for them. She wanted them because they were a solution to her financial problems. When I confronted my parents about this, they seemed genuinely shocked. "Angela never mentioned anything about money," my dad said, frowning. "She's been struggling, but I didn't think she'd stoop this low," my mom added, her voice tinged with disbelief. "She's not doing this for the kids," I said firmly. "She's doing it for herself. And I'm going to prove it." My lawyer agreed that exposing Angela's motives was critical. "If we can show the court that this isn't about the kids' well-being, it'll undermine her entire case," she said. We began gathering evidence. I tracked down court records showing Angela's financial troubles and statements about government benefits for adoptive parents. My lawyer subpoenaed Angela's bank records, which revealed just how dire her situation was. The turning point came when we obtained messages Angela had sent to a friend, bragging about her plans. In one text, she wrote, "Once I have the kids, everything will be easier. The benefits alone will cover most of my bills." In another, she admitted to exaggerating her concerns about me to make her case stronger. "You just have to sound worried enough," she wrote. The court eats that up. Those messages were a smoking gun. Angela's carefully constructed facade of concern crumbled under the weight of her own words. By the time our next court date rolled around, I felt more prepared than ever. Angela had underestimated me, thinking I'd crumble under the pressure of her accusations. But she didn't realize how far I was willing to go to protect my kids. As I sat in the courtroom, surrounded by the evidence my lawyer and I had painstakingly gathered, I felt a surge of determination. Angela had started this fight, but I was going to finish it. She thought she could take everything from me, but she was about to learn just how wrong she was. The build-up to the next court hearing was tense. I knew Angela wouldn't give up easily. She had already proven she was willing to lie, manipulate, and drag me through hell to get what she wanted. But this time, my lawyer had an ace up her sleeve, and it was something Angela never expected. Her own words. During discovery, my lawyer had requested access to Angela's digital communications, arguing that they could provide insight into her true motives. Angela and her lawyer fought the request, but the judge sided with us. What we found was both shocking and vindicating. The texts and emails painted a very different picture from the concerned, loving Aunt Angela had presented in court. In messages to her friends, she bragged about her supposed role as a savior. "Once I have the kids, they'll be in a real stable home," she wrote in one text, adding, "They deserve better than the chaos she puts them through." But it didn't stop there. Angela's messages revealed that her real motives were far from noble. She frequently mentioned the financial benefits she would receive if she gained custody of Emily and Jackson. "With the government assistance, I won't have to worry about rent for a while," she wrote to one friend. In another message, she calculated how much money she could save on taxes with the addition of 2 dependents. The most damning piece of evidence, however, was a text Angela had sent shortly after filing the CPS complaint. In it, she admitted to exaggerating her claims. "They'll believe anything if you sound concerned enough," she wrote. The casualness of her tone made my stomach churn. When my lawyer showed me the messages, I felt a mix of relief and fury. Relief, because this was exactly what we needed to prove Angela's true intentions. Fury, because it confirmed what I had feared all along. Angela didn't care about my kids. She cared about herself. The day we presented the evidence in court was a turning point in every sense of the word. Angela arrived looking as polished and composed as ever, her confident demeanor intact. She seemed to believe her narrative was unshakable, that the judge would see her as the concerned, selfless aunt fighting to save her niece and nephew. But that confidence didn't last long. My lawyer began by reading one of Angela's texts aloud. "Once I have the kids, everything will be easier. The benefits alone will cover most of my bills." She then handed the judge a printed copy of the message, along with several others highlighting Angela's financial motives. Angela shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her calm exterior beginning to crack. "And here's a message where the petitioner admits to exaggerating her concerns to make her case stronger," my lawyer continued. She read the text about CPS. "They'll believe anything if you sound concerned enough." Angela's face went pale. She opened her mouth as if to object, but her lawyer quickly whispered something to her, likely urging her to stay quiet. The judge's expression hardened as he reviewed the messages. "Ms. Angela," he said, his voice stern, "these communications suggest that your motives for pursuing custody are not solely in the children's best interests. Do you have an explanation for this?" Angela stammered, her carefully crafted persona slipping away. "Those were taken out of context," she said, her voice shaking. "I was just venting to my friends. I never meant." "They'll believe anything if you sound concerned enough," the judge interrupted, quoting her own words. "That doesn't sound like venting. That sounds like an intentional effort to manipulate the system." The courtroom was silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. I glanced at my lawyer, who gave me a small nod. We had her. Angela's confident facade continued to crumble as my lawyer presented more evidence. Records of her financial struggles, messages where she mocked my parenting behind my back, and even notes she had written to herself, planning how she would present her case. By the time my lawyer finished, Angela looked defeated. Her lawyer tried to salvage the situation, arguing that her financial difficulties didn't negate her concerns for the children's welfare. But the damage was done. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the tide turning in my favor. Angela's motives were exposed, her credibility shattered. As I sat in that courtroom, listening to the judge question her integrity, I felt a glimmer of hope. Angela had underestimated me, thinking she could steamroll her way to victory without facing any consequences. But now, she was finally being held accountable for her lies. The fight wasn't over yet, but this was a turning point, a moment where I began to see a future where my kids and I could move forward without the shadow of Angela's betrayal hanging over us. The judge's decision came at the end of a long and grueling day in court. As the words left his mouth, "Petition for custody is denied," I felt an enormous weight lift from my chest. Angela had been exposed for what she truly was, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe. But the relief was bittersweet. While I had won the battle, the scars of Angela's betrayal remained. The judge didn't stop at denying her petition. He also ordered an investigation into her false claims, citing the blatant manipulation of CPS and the court system. The thought of Angela facing consequences for her actions gave me some satisfaction, but it didn't erase the damage she'd done. After the hearing, I stepped outside the courtroom, my lawyer by my side, and inhaled deeply, as if I was breathing fresh air for the first time in ages. Angela, on the other hand, stormed past me without a word, her face a mixture of anger and humiliation. She refused to meet my gaze, but her clenched jaw and stiff posture spoke volumes. The fallout spread quickly through our family. My parents, who had been cautiously optimistic about the hearing, were devastated by the truth that had come to light. For months, they had been trying to navigate the middle ground between their two daughters, torn between supporting me and entertaining Angela's concerns. Now, they were forced to confront the reality of her motives. "She lied to us," my mom said during a tense conversation a few days later. "All those things she said about you, it was all to make herself look better." "I can't believe she'd go this far," my dad added, shaking his head. "We trusted her. I wanted to feel vindicated, but instead, I just felt tired." "She didn't just lie to you," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "She tried to take my kids. She weaponized your doubts and used them against me." My mom looked away, guilt etched into her face. "We didn't know," she whispered. "You didn't want to know," I replied, unable to hold back my frustration. "You gave her the benefit of the doubt, even when she was tearing my life apart." My dad placed a hand on my shoulder.
"We're sorry," he said.
"For everything. We should have supported you from the start." I nodded, accepting their apology, but the wounds Angela had inflicted ran deep. As for Angela, she refused to take any responsibility for her actions. When confronted by our parents, she doubled down, insisting she had only been trying to help. "You saw the way she was struggling," she told them. "I just wanted to make sure the kids were okay." Her defiance infuriated me. Even after being exposed in court, she clung to her narrative of being the concerned aunt, unwilling to admit that her actions had been driven by greed and jealousy. But I was done trying to reason with her. After everything she'd done, I knew I couldn't trust her. I couldn't let her continue to poison my life or my kids' lives. I made the difficult decision to cut ties with her completely. It wasn't easy. Despite everything, she was still my sister, but I knew it was the only way to protect my family. I blocked her number, removed her from my social media, and made it clear to my parents that I didn't want her around Emily and Jackson. "She's not part of our lives anymore," I told my mom during a particularly emotional phone call. "I need you to respect that." My mom hesitated, but eventually agreed. "We'll support whatever you think is best," she said. Cutting Angela out was both liberating and heartbreaking. There were moments when I mourned the relationship we could have had if she hadn't let her jealousy consume her. But those moments were fleeting, replaced by the overwhelming need to protect my kids. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding. I spent extra time with Emily and Jackson, pouring all my energy into creating a sense of normalcy for them. I leaned on my friends and neighbors, who had supported me through the worst of it, and found strength in their kindness. The pain of Angela's betrayal would take time to heal, but one thing was clear: I wasn't going to let her define our future. My kids and I had survived her attempt to tear us apart, and now it was time to move forward. Angela had taken enough from us. I wasn't going to give her anything more. With Angela finally out of our lives, the first step was learning to breathe again. The constant stress and fear that had consumed me for months began to fade, but it wasn't an instant relief. Her accusations had left a mark, not just on my family, but on me as a mother. I couldn't help but question myself. Was I doing enough? Could I have prevented all this? The self-doubt was crippling at first. Every tantrum Emily threw, every messy corner of the house, every time Jackson had a scraped knee, I wondered if Angela had been right, if maybe I really wasn't good enough. But then I'd look at my kids, Emily's wide smile as she proudly showed me her latest drawing, Jackson's laughter as he ran around the yard with his favorite toy truck. They were happy. They were loved. And that was what mattered. It wasn't easy, but little by little, we found our way back to normal. I leaned heavily on my support system during those first few months. My friends and neighbors, who had written letters for the custody hearing, became my lifeline. They reassured me on my worst days, reminding me of the mother they knew I was. One of my closest friends, Sarah, started dropping by with coffee and pastries just to chat and help me unwind. "You've been through hell," she said one afternoon as we watched our kids play in the backyard. But you're coming out of it stronger. Don't forget that. I also began to rebuild my relationship with my parents. After the court revealed Angela's true motives, they were devastated by how easily they had been manipulated. They apologized repeatedly, each time sounding more sincere. "We should have trusted you," my mom said during a tearful conversation. "We let Angela get in our heads, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life." "It's going to take time," I told her honestly. "But I want us to move forward. I need you to be there for me and the kids, not just when things are easy, but when they're hard too." And they were. Slowly, my parents became more involved, offering to babysit when I needed a break, and making an effort to show Emily and Jackson the love and stability they deserved. But the most important part of rebuilding was focusing on my kids. Emily and Jackson were my world, and I poured every ounce of my energy into making their lives as happy and stable as possible. We created new routines to replace the chaos Angela had caused. Mornings became a time for singing silly songs while we got ready for school and daycare. Evenings were dedicated to family dinners and bedtime stories, with each child choosing their favorite book. Weekends were filled with trips to the park, craft projects, and the occasional movie night with popcorn and blankets on the living room floor. One night, as I tucked Emily into bed, she looked up at me with her big, curious eyes. "Mommy, are we okay now?" she asked softly. "We're more than okay," I said, kissing her forehead. "We're better than ever." Her smile in that moment filled me with a surge of determination. Angela had tried to take everything from me, but she had failed. My kids were happy, healthy, and thriving, and no one was ever going to take them from me again. Rebuilding wasn't just about the practical things. It was about rediscovering myself as a mother. I realized that I didn't have to be perfect to be good enough. My kids didn't need a spotless house or a mother who never got tired. They needed love, patience, and the kind of unwavering support that only I could give them. I stopped doubting myself so much. When Jackson threw a tantrum, I reminded myself that it was normal for a 3-year-old. When Emily spilled paint all over the dining room table during an art project, I laughed with her instead of worrying about the mess. I also started taking better care of myself. For months, I had been so consumed by the fight with Angela that I barely had time to think about my own needs. Now, I made time for things that brought me joy: long walks, reading before bed, and even a yoga class that Sarah convinced me to join. With every passing day, I felt more like myself. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control over my life again. Rebuilding wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Angela had left a trail of destruction in her wake, but she hadn't succeeded in breaking me. If anything, her betrayal had made me stronger. Every time I looked at Emily and Jackson, I was reminded of why I had fought so hard. They were my world, and I would do anything to protect them. We had been through a storm, but we had come out the other side, together. Angela's shadow no longer loomed over our lives. Instead, there was light, laughter, and a sense of peace I hadn't felt in months. We were rebuilding one day at a time, and I knew that the best was yet to come. Looking back on the whirlwind of betrayal, heartbreak, and resilience, I can finally see Angela's actions for what they were: a painful but necessary lesson. She tried to tear my life apart, to take the most precious parts of it, my children, and bend them to her will. But in doing so, she inadvertently reminded me of what truly matters. My bond with Emily and Jackson has always been the anchor in my life. Angela's betrayal didn't weaken that bond, it strengthened it. Every sleepless night spent worrying about their future, every tear I shed wondering if I was good enough, every moment I fought to protect them, those were the moments that solidified my role as their mother. Emily and Jackson didn't need a perfect mom. They didn't need a spotless house or a parent who never made mistakes. They needed me, my love, my strength, my unwavering presence in their lives. And as I look at them now, happy, healthy, and thriving, I know that no one, not even Angela, can ever take that away from me. Family is a word we often take for granted. For years, I thought it meant unconditional love and support from the people who shared your blood. Angela shattered that illusion. She was my sister by birth, but she showed me that not everyone deserves a place in your life simply because of a familial bond. Angela's betrayal forced me to reevaluate what family truly means. It's not about titles or obligations. It's about loyalty, trust, and standing by each other when it counts. My true family isn't defined by blood alone. It's the friends and neighbors who rallied around me when I needed them most, the people who wrote letters and testified on my behalf, and even my parents, who eventually saw the truth and stood by me. And, of course, it's Emily and Jackson. They are my heart and soul, the reason I fought so hard and refused to give up, even when things felt impossible. I've learned so much about myself through this journey. I've learned that I'm stronger than I ever thought possible. I've learned that it's okay to ask for help, that no one can do it all alone. And most importantly, I've learned to trust my instincts and stand firm in my love for my children. Angela's actions tested me in ways I never imagined, but they didn't break me. If anything, they made me more confident in my ability to protect my kids and give them the life they deserve. There are still days when I think about Angela, about what might have been if things had gone differently. I wonder if she regrets what she did or if she still believes she was in the right. But those thoughts don't linger for long. Angela made her choices, and I've made mine. My focus is on the future, on Emily and Jackson, and the life we're building together. Every bedtime story, every hug, every shared laugh is a reminder of how far we've come and how much we've overcome. In the end, Angela didn't win. She may have caused chaos and pain, but she didn't destroy us. Instead, she gave me the opportunity to prove, to myself and to my kids, that we are stronger than any storm. As I tuck Emily and Jackson into bed tonight, listening to their soft, sleepy breaths, I feel an overwhelming sense of peace. This is what matters, this love, this family, this unshakable bond. The lesson Angela taught me wasn't one I wanted to learn, but it's one I'll carry with me forever. Family isn't about blood. It's about love, loyalty, and standing by the people who matter most. And as long as I have Emily and Jackson by my side, I know I have everything I'll ever need.